The question is, do you remember any of your four grandparents? Any greats? What were their names? Any memories you have?
I knew all my grandparents
All four.
personally. And I knew on my mother's side, I knew my great-grandfather and grandmother. And some of the other, their cousins and so on. But my grandparents came from Italy. On my father's side, my mother's side, on the Daly side, they were Scotch, Irish, English, and Welsh. And they originated in Scotland originally and in England. I never got to know Moses Daly. That was my great-grandfather on my mother's side, on the Daly side. I never knew him, but I knew a lot about him. He was a freighter across the plains. After he came from Nauvoo to Utah, then he run freighter teams hauling supplies from back east out here and grain and stuff back east after they began to farm here. But I did know his first wife, my great-grandmother, who was Amanda Wilson. I knew her, and she used to live right down here where Ad Hunter used to live on the corner. There used to be their home was just east of that, right east of that property, and there's where she lived. But she was well known.
So for reference on her, Ad Hunter home would be right next to Carl Favero's home.
Yes.
It would be just north of Carl's home.
North and east.
And then she would have lived east of on that street, a little ways.
Right where that sump place is there. There, up until just recently, there's been the old well that they drilled, and it flowed, the water flowed there all the time. And when she was there across the street on the property that Buck and Monty Georgia owns, there used to be, and I just remember as a kid, a tribe of Indians. It would come there in winter, all winter, on that stream. And I just can remember some of those. They only did it after I got to be 5 or 6, 7 years old, a couple of 3 times, and then they quit coming. But there was a tribe of them that came there. My grandfather on my mother's side, he married an Indian lady, an Indian maid, and had 2 children, and she died and left the 2 of them. One was Jen or Jenny, and then the other was Jim Daly, James Daly. And he lived to be quite up into his 90s. And they had a nice bunch of kids. One of them was Theodore Daly, Barnard Daly, Ruth Daly was a girl. There was about 4 boys and 2 girls in that family that came from that heritage. And then after she died, he went up into Blue Creek and worked on the farms up there. And after he worked on those farms up there for a while, a fellow by the name of Bill Buck went up there with him, and they went up there and homesteaded some ground. And some bad years came, and they couldn't make it. But while they were up there, they used to go to a little place, Curlew Sinks, an area up there. A bunch of them, he was single then, and he didn't have a wife. Him and a bunch of his buddies used to go to dances on Saturday nights. And one night they went to a dance. When they got to the dance, he spotted a little gal he thought was real nice looking. And he said to his buddy, he said, "Hey, I'm going to take that gal home tonight." She happened to be there with another fellow. So he danced the rest of the dances that night with her, and time to go home, and he just started out the door with him, and a big squabble started. They tell the story that he beat the crap out of about 4 guys and went on home with, and they started a courtship. And that was the Chatterton side. On my grandmother Daly's side, they came from England. They came across the plains, and they came here with the Hancock Company. They were, I think it was Sheffield, England. They lived, and they belonged to a royal family. They were married over there, and they stood to inherit a lot of money. Their family was wealthy. Well, when they joined the church, the family disinherited them. They had no other choice. They couldn't stay there because they were blackballed, and at that time, anybody that joined the church was out in England, and of course they came. Then they decided they had one choice, and that's come here. They came here, and Brigham Young sent them up to Idaho to a little place up there called, I forget the name of the place now, but they went up there and homesteaded, and eventually he got the job of being postmaster up there. While he was up there, he built a little store and had a store there and a post office. But they were Chattertons. And she was living up in that area when Grandpa went to this dance and met her. And the story comes down the ladder to us that Grandpa and Grandma Chatterton, that's my great-grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side, had 18 children. That was when they didn't know what the RH factor was, and they had 18 children. Grandma was the last one, and at that time is when they found out about the RH factor, and they saved her. So, you guys have one chance in 18 to be in here.
18 died and
Lost 18, 17 of them, and she was the 18th one. But so they after they was up there for a while, they lived there for a while, and Bill Buck over here, who was Romney's grandfather, was my grandfather's friend, and they had homesteaded up there. So then when this situation happened that they couldn't make it up there anymore, they loaded their houses. When you homestead, you have to build a house on that property, a home, and establish residence there. Well, when it got so tough they couldn't make it anymore, they loaded their houses up on these old-style running gears, and Romney's grandfather, Bill Buck, put that house right here where Romney's got his house for the office. That was their home, and that's where Bill Buck lived for a while, till he built the house back here in the field. And my grandfather moved his house, you know where my barn is? There used to be a cottonwood tree out there. He moved his house up there and lived there for several years. Then he bought the place down there where Carr lives and moved that house down there and built a house and lived in it, and he had 20 acres there. Well, Amanda Wilson married Brown, the lady that lived over there by the well, on Ad Hunter's property, married Brown, and she had about 5 or 6 kids. And they were half brothers to my grandfather. And so that property, then when they built that home right there across from the church, the Browns did. So my grandfather bought that house and that farm, and that give him 60 acres. He bought 40 acres, and he owned 60 acres right there across from the church. And the Browns moved up here where Lucia lives, up in Wilson. They built a big house up there. It's gone now. But they were half brothers. The Brown boys were half brothers to my grandfather. But when they lived in that house, there was a story come out. My father's folks had come here from Wyoming, and they bought a piece of ground right down there where the Taylor Ward Second Farm is. And they had a lot of fancy horses after they moved down there. My father was always in the horse business one way or another. But they'd built a nice big barn there and had a bunch of horses there. He had 2 or 3 fancy stallions, really expensive. And after they came down here, they bought a binder and got into business, and they was cutting grain for people. And this Brown guy that lived there across from the church wanted some grain cut. Well, my dad and his brothers were cutting grain for different people around, and they couldn't get to Brown, but he wanted it done right now. So somehow it made him mad. Well, that night, their barn got on fire. And he was seen leaving that area going back home. But they could never prove that he set the barn on fire. But a number of years later, after my dad was dead, no, my grandfather was dead, I mean, and old man Brown came to me and he says, John, I want to tell you something. He says, I want to tell you that I didn't set your grandfather's barn on fire. I didn't have anything to do with that. I said, Bill, why did you tell me that? You know different and I know different. And I had proof right then that they did set, because he come to apologize. But when I questioned him about it, he had no more to say. But those are some of the things that happen in people and families. But he was related to my mother's folks, and my father's folks were there. But anyway, that's the daily side of it. That's how they got into the picture. But my grandfather, Favero, came from Italy to to New York, worked in the mines in New York. But he brought 2 of his daughters, or one of his daughters and 2 of his sons with him, and came over here. And he worked in New York. Then he went from New York to Coal City, Illinois, but he made several trips back and forth to Italy to take care of business and sell his property there and come out here. Well, he ended up in Wyoming, and he finally got his family all here, and that's where they ended up, in Wyoming. My grandfather brought the first 3 kids over with him, and they stayed here as he traveled back and forth to get the others here. But finally, my grandmother and the other 3 kids came over together on the boat. And everything they had to come over, they packed in one basket to be 8 days on the ocean in the ship. But they came here and met my grandfather, and then they all worked in the mines for quite a number of years. My dad he wasn't old enough to go to mines when they came over, so he used to drive they didn't have wells in the water up there, so he used to haul water from a big spring for Rock Springs people, for the town, until he got big enough to work in the mine. When he went to work in the mine, he went in and drove the donkeys to pull the coal cars out. He'd drive the donkeys, and they'd pull about 4 or 5 cars out on the tracks, take them out, and they'd dump them off in the coal cars. But he did that for quite a number of years. Finally, they would let him go and work in the mine, in the shafts, with the with the other miners. And my Aunt Maggie, who married Carl Rogers, he never did go down to mine to work, but he had a saloon and took the easy way to make it. He was mooching off the miners, keeping them whiskeyed up so they was happy, and he ended up probably better off than any of them, because he built a hotel and became mayor. He became the sheriff of Diamondville and Kemmerer. And finally, one morning, Grandpa and the four boys went down in the mine to go to work. Well, 3 boys, because Sam wasn't old enough. He was the youngest. They went down into the mines to work, and they used to go in there and drill into the walls, and then put the powder in and the cap in, tamp it in, and run the fuse out and go down the shaft a ways and light it and let it blow out. Well, right next to him, in the room next to him, the guys were tamping a load of powder into the drill hole, and somehow they scarred it and blew it up. And there was 3 of them in there, and all they found of those 3 guys was the one man's gold watch. Grandpa gathered up his boys and left the mine, never went back. That's when they came down here and moved down there. And they were living there and had been there for quite a while. And Grandpa and Grandma Daly had lived right next there. And that's when he met my mother. And there's a little funny story goes with that. A lot of you knew old Henry Anderson, who lived over here. And right next to where my grandfather lived down here on the old Taylor Ward farm there, Keith Anderson folks lived right next door. Andrew Anderson was his name. And then the Faveros lived on that farm. And that's Keith Anderson's grandfather. Andrew Anderson couldn't speak, and his family couldn't speak any English. And they couldn't speak Italian. My father's folks couldn't speak any English, and they couldn't speak any Swede. But they got along real good as neighbors, and finally, as they began to progress, they got so they could talk, and my dad and Henry used to keep company together. So they had just used to go down to the old schoolhouse down on 4700. There was a schoolhouse there. And then they built the new church house. But they were traveling one day. Henry and my dad was out in the buggy, going for a buggy ride on a Sunday. They'd been over north somewhere, and it was coming back towards the church house, on that road on 4300. And as they came up on my dad or my mother and a lady who used to live over here, J.B. Hunter's daughter, Ethel Hunter, they were walking along the road. So as they pulled up on, my dad was always tricky, doing some little funny thing. They rode up close to the buggy or the girls, and took his buggy whip and snapped Grandma Favero on the butt with a buggy whip. And I guess he got hell, because they really, Ethel and Mother really gave him a going over, and I guess they made peace with him, and they invited my mother and Ethel to go for a buggy ride with him, and they rode uptown and had ice cream, and that's how they got started to get together.
Much older was Grandpa, your father?
12 years older than Mother. But she was a big, full mature girl at 15.
So she was 15 and your father would have been then 27.
Yeah. Well, he was 28 when he got married. So, but anyway, that's how that, I got a Charlie horse, wow. Anyway, that's how they got together. But I didn't know any of my folks on my father's side except my grandfather. Didn't know any of the great-grandparents on that side. But I'm told that in that family there was my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, and his father were all named Giovanni. So that name goes way back. So there's about 7 generations with that name in it that's got Giovanni Favero. And I'm told now that in that area where they lived in Italy, that there's no Faveros live there anymore. They're all moved out. Some came to Corona, Kansas, and my father went there and visited him several times. But he had some full cousins there. While we were in Chicago, there was a lot of Faveros there, but we could never hook any of them up when Melba and I was there. We tried to do that, and we tried to hook the Dailies up to Daly, Mayor Daly from Chicago, but we could never hook that one up either. I don't know why, but I had a lady who came from Plain City, a Taylor lady, who lived there, who was a genealogist, and she could never hook up us with them, but they came from the same area exactly as my grandfather Daly's folks came from. So I don't know, but anyway, that's about as much as I remember about those.
I got a question too, and you answered some of it. The question is, what did your grandfathers do for a living, and also did your grandmothers work at all?
All of my grandmothers were homemakers. They took care of the kids, and the old man made sure he was happy. And the grandfathers, they were all away from horsemen, coal miners, farmers, whatever. They did what they had to survive in those days. And that was clear down to my generation, that we did what we could to survive, and that was that way until I was probably 9, 10 years old. Then things began to change, and a lot of people began to get into education, and education took a precedence over a lot of things. But in our family, there were so many of us that Dad and Mother had to have some help to raise them, and I didn't get the chance to go to college like I'd like to have done. I could have probably done a lot of things because I could adjust easy, and most of my brothers could adjust easy to whatever came along. But you did in those days what you had to get by.
Didn't your grandfather Favero, or was it Daly, build some houses up on China?
My grandfather Daly, or Favero, when he came here, he came out here and farmed for quite a number of years. And then when he got through farming, he made sure that his boys were established. Mike in the saloon business, Aunt Mary and Uncle Carl, they were in several different things. And Aunt Maggie and Carl, they were established there in Wyoming. And he stayed up in Wyoming for a number of years after they came down here, because he was the big shot up there. He was running everything. And he also got in the business of bootlegging, and some of his family later, his daughter's husband and a bunch of them, who I worked the railroad with, was the guys driving the hotshot cars hauling the booze around the country. So that was that side of the family. So they were into anything and everything to make a living. And on the other side of the family, there was a lot of things happened. My dad worked at anything that come along to make a living, but we couldn't get an education, Jim and I, like we'd like to have done, because Dad and Mother had to have the help. We went out and went to work. When I got a paycheck, you know where I went? Home to help the family. So, and that's the way things went. But
So your dad, or your grandfather Favero, made sure each one of his boys had a farm, right?
Right. And then he sold his farm. He didn't give it to them or let them inherit or anything. He just let them get established, and then he sold that.
So Sam had a farm, Grandpa had a farm. Sam's farm was over Hooper, right?
Yeah, it was first he owned the place right here where Newell Hadley used to live. You know where Mark Peterson lives up here?
Uh-huh,
That house east of that?
uh-huh.
Okay, that's where Sam first bought. Then he sold, and then he went down here where Sam Hadley lived.
Right.
Bought that. And then he sold that and went to Hooper. So he made several changes. But I had another thought in mind.
Let's see, the kids were, the 6 of them then was Mike, Mary,
Tony, Maggie, Mike, Mary, John, and Sam. And they lost 2 over there. Their names are on the pedigree papers.
what did Tony do? Is he farmer?
Farm. He worked in the mines for years. And when he came down, he got the farm down there where Gus lives.
And that's where Gus's family comes from, is through Tony.
Through Tony, yep.
He actually had a son named Tony too, didn't he?
Tony, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then your father, the Dailies then, they were first of all freighters, and then farmers.
Yeah, yeah. My great grandfather was the freighter. He married Amanda Wilson, and then he left her, and he went down, freighting down from here to Los Angeles, and a little place down here south of here, down toward the southern part of the state. He married another wife and a family. Then he went to California and married a woman there. So there's a string of dailies down that way.
But he didn't practice polygamy.
No, he didn't practice. He dumped him and got a new one.
So which of the, did they call your father John?
They call him Jack.
Jack. John,
Where
Jack,
does he
Giovanni.
fit?
He is next to youngest.
Sam's the youngest.
Yeah. Sam was deaf as a cooter. But don't say anything bad about him. He could read your lips like nobody's business.
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
He had a farm down there in Hooper, and one he had a nice set of harness and beautiful horses. And he got established quick. And one, I'll tell you this story. One night he was in the barn there doing his chores and getting ready to milk, and some guys come in, and they was sizing up these horses, and there's 2 guys, and they was sizing up the horses and sizing up the harness and everything, and talked to him, and pretty soon they left. Next morning, when he went out to hook the horses up, the harness was gone. So they got the sheriff and began to look around. Finally, they got a hold of these 2 guys, but they tried to lie out of it because they knew Sam was deaf and he couldn't hear. But they were talking to each other, see, when he was listening and watching them. They was talking and thinking he couldn't hear, but he read their lips and he knew what they said. So when they got him, they brought him over there. And he repeated to those 2 guys right before the sheriff what they had to say. He nailed him right there. But you didn't dare say a word to him because he had you nailed.
So he could talk,
Oh, yeah.
but he couldn't hear.
Yeah, but he was deaf. Yeah, he had 2 boys, Alfred and Dewey. They were both expert athletes. They were on the Weaver High School ball team, both football and basketball. Dewey went up to Oregon, Washington, and Bremerton, Washington, and taught school up there and taught sports. He only lived to be 56-year-old, and his family's up there. And Alfred married twice, but lost one wife and married another one, never did have a family. He's still in town.
He's a nice guy too.
Yeah.
He's in church.
Yeah, oh yeah, Alfred's a real
Very active.
peach of a guy. Yeah, he good. They were good kids, both of them.
Well, I think you pretty well answered number 3 too, Dad. And it talks about your relationship with your grandparents and how you personally, any personal stories with you. I know you farmed with your grandfather.
Hey, I worked with both of my grandfathers, both of them. They taught me a lot of things that you don't teach kids now. And by the way, I was, because my name was Giovanni, John, I was the favorite grandson. my grandmother found a good pocket knife or found something the boy would like. And Tony used to get mad at me. Yeah, you always get everything from Grandma. Like I said, I can't help it. She likes me. It used to make him mad.
When did the? I thought the name Giovanni was to the oldest boy.
No,
It
no,
sounds like your grandpa wasn't.
no. Well, I guess they picked the favorite son.
I just wondered because I know you are and Giovanni is, and
Yeah, that's
So
a
on
strange
that
one
way.
because you go back in, and I think before Grandpa, Dad's father, it was still the oldest boy.
but there for
I
a
don't
couple
know.
of generations it
Must
wasn't.
have changed.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's. But Grandma used to. Oh, my poor John. Come here and get me a kiss. She said in Italian, come here, let me give you a kiss. Tiet bocha, pura bocha. Poor boy.
What about your Grandma Daly? What did you do with her? Any special things you did with
She
her?
was one of the nicest, kindest women I ever knew. She was an excellent cook, good homemaker, a hard worker, a little bit of a woman. She was just about like Gina. And she had 7 or 8 kids, about 8 of them. There was, there was George and Annie and Ross and Deward, Hazel, Florence, and then they lost 2 boys. And,
And they lived down there in the farmhouse right across the
right,
church.
right in that old house that's down there now.
And then your father bought that from him.
When when Grandpa Daly died, Durward come down. No, before Grandpa Daly, after Grandma died, Durward, he was farming in Idaho, and he came down to take the farm over and run it. And he was having a tough time, but he was just barely making it. And all of a sudden, he got appendicitis and peritonitis set in and killed him. Well, he had about 5 kids, and his wife, Pearl Daly. Well, Pearl couldn't handle the place. She didn't have any way of, then the kids weren't big enough to farm it. We tried to help them. Dad sent us down to help them, and still Pearl just give up. And the Federal Land Bank was going to take the place over. So she said, well, let the bank have it. So Dad tried to encourage her. No, let the bank have it. Dad didn't have it too much then, but after she told the bank to go ahead and take it over, Dad went up to the bank and talked to him, and because Mother was direct descendants of the family, Grandpa's family, and so the bank decided they'd let Dad take over the contract and pay it out. But that's how he got the place. He made a settlement with Pearl and for some of her equity, then he took the place over, and that's how we got it. But Mother felt like she wanted to save the place because it was family. So.
Do you remember their funerals or anything like that of them, of your grandparents when they died and their funerals?
Well, yeah, I remember a lot of things about them, but I remember that they were close to the Hunters and all those people down in that area, Hunters and Hadleys and all those people. They were all close together. All Eldon Hadley's, Mark's grandfather was, and Steve Hadley was all in the same age then, and Joe Hadley, Hi Hadley, Tom Hadley, all those. Yeah, the Gibsons. J.J. Gibson was a little younger. He married one of the Hadleys. But they were all people there together. In those days, you didn't go to town unless you hooked the horse and buggy up. I remember well when the first cars came into town. My grandfather bought an Oldsmobile. Old Bill Buck, Romney's grandfather, bought a Rio. And I can remember those old cars scared the crap out of the horses when they come steaming down the road. Anyway, we used to go to church before Dad bought a Model T Ford. We used to ride to church on the horse or else take the buggy. Well, we didn't want to hook up the buggy and unhook it, so we'd throw a blanket on the horse, Jim and I, and ride to church. And that is if Mother and Dad didn't go, but they used to hook up the buggy and go quite often. And Dad wanted to join the church when he first met Mother, before he was even married. They said, well, you haven't been around long enough. We can't let you do that. You'll have to prove yourself. Well, you know how long it was before he joined? When Giovanni was baptized. Jim baptized him in the church. That's how long it took him to get in. But he supported the family and supported Mother and made sure we all went to church. But we used to ride to everywhere we'd go. Dad had a beautiful black team with a big Surrey with lights on the side. We'd go steaming down the street, and there wasn't too many of them had one around. But I was born down in the old place down there. I'm the only one in the family that was born in Taylor. So then Dad bought a place in Roy. And after he lived there, we lived there for, I guess I was about 6 or 7 years old when we moved down here. But they used to grow beets and stuff up there, and I got a bump on my head back here yet from that damn beet cultivator. But anyway, Mother used to lead the horse, and Dad used to steer the cultivator so he wouldn't cut the beets out. And they set me on the damn cultivator in a box. Well, the box slipped off, and I went down a minute, and they didn't get the horse stopped soon enough. That's why I'm a little goofy, bumped my head. But anyway, that's how they started out over there. So then he decided he wanted to get back in Taylor. Mother wanted to get back in Taylor. So there was a guy by the name of Hessmark who used to work the railroad. There where Tom is now. That's where we grew up. Dad bought that place, and that's where we grew up. But before we bought that place, he used to help my grandfather farm, and they used to come up that road right here, down here to the corner, come up this road and go right here at the corner, right on 3500, and go straight over to Roy on that same road. And I've seen the time when we went across that road before they had any gravel roads around here, was just mud roads. And I've seen us almost get stuck with that buggy and horse going back and forth in that mud. And
Over by Janetti's farm?
yeah, across that gumbo, all the way along there. And you used to go up this road, you know, right here where you go to Wilson Church, that gumbo slough there. In the wintertime, you were lucky if you could get a horse and buggy through there. That's what kind of roads we had. And I remember when they gravelled all these roads, I was just a little snart. But we used to go back and forth over there, and they'd put me down the front in the buggy, and when Jim come along, he was born in Roy, and he'd come back over to help Grandpa farm, and they'd hold Jim up there out of the way and nice, but I was down here where that damn horse kept throwing rocks and horsemen on my face down that thing.
I thought you were the
Now,
favorite.
when Daly's died, they were members of the church, and so did they have their funerals at the church?
Yeah, out here.
And then they would take them uptown to bury him.
Yeah, they all buried him up in the Ogden City. That's the only cemetery around here then.
Uh-huh.
Ogden City Cemetery.
Right.
But,
Interesting.
all right, now what's the next
Who's
one?
got number 4?
I've got number 4. Okay, this is kind of along different lines here. Tell about handed down talents. They have some suggestions here. Any foods were handed down. Clothespin dolls. I don't think you had any. Willow whistles. Any pottery. Quilting. Whittling. Just anything that was handed down to you. That was
What was handed down to me is if you didn't,
talent.
is if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You better be able to carry your loads when just big enough, and you had to produce, or else you got your butt kicked. And I got mine kicked a few times, and I was the oldest, and if something went wrong, they didn't ask the kid that done it. They asked me why I let him do it. I used to get the blame for the misgivings, but I used to work that out after Dad left. But as far as talents, and I just said to your dad here at the table a while ago, I'm mad at Grandma Favero and Melba because they taught me to cook. Every time Fernie needs some help cooking, she wants me to help her. But anyway, that's one thing that was handed down from both families. My grandma Chatterton and my great-grandma Chatterton, I remember her well. I've got pictures of them both. But she knew how to do all the English cooking. Mother got that from her mother. And there's nobody living that made better dumplings than she would. She could cook a meal and nothing flat. An excellent cook. Grandma Chatterton's the same way. But I might tell you a little story about them. After they moved up there to Weston and Preston, they built a little house up there at Homestead, and out in the distance they put the crandy out there and had a little trail going back and forth to the crandy. Well, they got so bad that they didn't have any food or anything, and they didn't know where the next meal was going to come from. They didn't have any groceries, and they were religious, and they had prayer that morning about it. And so Grandpa left the house and went out to the crandy. And they said it was just like walking across the floor. The ground was that bare. So he didn't see anything going out and that's why I went out there, and he said he challenged the Lord again about their problem. And on the way back, there was a $20 bill laying in that path. And that bought him enough groceries for 2 months. So that's if you don't think it works, that was proof that it did. But my mother learned all of her Italian skills about cooking and housekeeping and everything from my grandma Favero. She was a good cook. They don't make minestrone soup anymore like she used to. They don't make polenta like she used to. Spaghetti, hey, the spaghetti they make now is a laugh. I could make you some spaghetti if I'd make it like she used to make it. And they didn't even make it with meatballs. They'd cook the hamburger and mix it with cheese. Then they would cook a sauce. And they didn't use a lot of tomatoes. They made other type sauce. And they would put a layer of spaghetti, a layer of sauce, a layer of cheese, layer of spaghetti, layer of sauce. Build a great big dish like that and set it in the middle of the table. Grandpa would serve it to everybody. You pass your plate around the table. So everybody got the same. But
that's the way they served it even when I was a kid. Not necessarily that, but all food at Grandpa's table was served in a plate, was passed around to the person, and you pass it around to the next person. And that's the way they served it.
He'd take the plate to his left and move it to his right and move it to the left. And they'd go around until that plate come back, and then he filled his last.
Yeah. That's a tradition. Your love of horses, did that come from your grandfather? Your father?
Both of them. There was never, as far as handling horses, there was never two guys that knew horses any better than my dad and my grandfather Favero. They had good horses. Grandpa always had anywhere from 3 to 5, 10, 15 head of horses, good horses. Grandpa Daly, there was never a guy that could break horses like he could. And he could take a horse and a cultivator, one-hand cultivator with one of the horses he had, and he never put blinders on it, never put lines on it. Called him Kern. He was a stallion. Take him out, and he'd go down the row of tomatoes, go at the end, and he could turn right around, and that horse would never step on a tomato. He didn't have to. Didn't have his blinders. He could see. That old horse could move around, and if he'd go to step on a tomato, Grandpa would holler, "Kern, damn your heart!" Scare the old horse about half to death. He'd straighten up, and boy, he'd be real careful how he turned around. But he had that horse trained so well that he'd never step on a tomato. But he was.
You understand what blinders are?
But he never. He could be in the house at night sleeping, and that old horse would start. That horse, you had to chain him with a chain at night to keep him from getting out and getting mischief. And he'd start pawing on the manger and stuff. Grandpa right in bed at night let a big war whoop out of him, and that horse had settled right down. He was scared to death of Grandpa. But that's the way he had all of his horses. Yeah, he was a good, both families a good horseman. That's where all the kids get it.
Yeah.
From both sides. So.
What about like musical talents or art or any of those kinds?
There was a lot of that on both sides. I remember when I was just a kid, we used to go down, they would go down to my Uncle Tony's or over to Sam's or up to Mike's, and they'd have these parties, big get-togethers, like we have now. And they would, and Uncle Tony had a squeeze box, a saxophone, or not saxophone, but an accordion, and several other instruments they had, and they'd play and sing their heart out. But there was, you had a good voice to some of them. But you'd never go into my grandfather's house. You better not leave if you didn't have dinner. He'd always insist, and Grandpa Daly, if he killed a beef or a pork, every one of his family got a piece of that pork, and all the neighbors. If he had to kill two to do it, he'd do it. But he shared everything he had with anybody who was around. But he had a lot of good talents. And in my grandfather Favero's family, they had a thing in Italy years ago that they couldn't get married until they passed a certain test to qualify them to be married. They had to know something about doctor stuff, the man did. And they had to know different things that they had to know. And they had to qualify before they could get married. And they had to prove that they was ready to get married. And the women the same way. It's too bad they don't do that now. And some of the old countries over there, I understand, still have some of those things going on. But that made men and women in those days. They don't do that anymore. Number what?
Number 5. Tell us about your favorite uncle.
Well, on my mother's side, the one we used to rely on if we needed his help or do something was Durward. He was the youngest boy, and just to show you how he worked with us. When we were in high school, we missed the bus. Dad wouldn't let us take the car to go. You go ahead, walk. You missed the bus, walk to school. We'd walk down to Durward's and borrow his whippet and go to school. He'd loan us his whippet. We'd come back and park. Dad never did find it out. But he was, and then I guess on the other side, probably Sam was good, and Uncle Mike was always good. When I got engaged to your grandma, Mother and Dad and I in Melville, that's where I gave her a ring. It's one of in his saloon. In Mike's saloon, we went there to have lunch and have a little treat. And I gave her ring in there. That's so. And Uncle Jim Daly was good. Jim was good. When Melville used to work in town, he worked in town, and many times he'd go to Keely's Cafe to eat, and Melville would go in there and sit and have lunch with him. She learned a lot about the family from him, and he was good. But most of my uncles were good to be around, both sides of the family. So it was kind of hard to pick one from the other. And I was the oldest of the family. Of course, I was always the favorite. And the other kids used to get mad at me because, but that's all right, it's fine. Go.
Do you have a favorite aunt?
I think on my mother's side, probably my mother's youngest sister, Florence. She was just finishing up school, so we was going into school, and she used to fight our battles for us. But on the other side, Aunt Mary, that's the one that Minnie Coletti's mother. She was quite nice to be around, and she lost her husband when quite young, and she only had the one child, and that's Minnie, and that's where I got my start in GE from, is that still tied the family. And I'm worth about $80,000 today from it. So I guess she's kind of favorite, huh?
Yeah, I count that as my favorite.
So what's next?
Number 7.
Oh, I got number 7. Well, you've told us quite a bit about your father. Well, actually, not a lot about your father. You've told us about your grandfather. So, what about your father? Characteristics? What do you like? His talents, his colors, his temperament? Family stories? I can remember one thing about his temperament. You can probably tell a lot more, but I remember one time when he was mad at Paul, and so mad at Paul, he threw the stool and busted the plaster off the wall. I heard that story a time or two, so he had a temper.
Yeah, and Dad had a lot to put up with 12 brothers and one sister. And I took a lot of guff if anything went wrong. They'd want to know why I didn't take charge of it and straighten it out. So next time he left and I had something to do, I was a little tougher. I made sure it got done next time. But he was a person that if he told you to do something once, he'd give you an ultimatum, and if you didn't do it, the ultimatum took hold. But he was good to work with. Dad always made sure that we had what we needed, and he was a good butcher. He knew a lot of different things. Mechanics came easy for him. He could fix machinery up in a hurry. And as kids began to grow up, he quit doing a lot of those things. But he was pretty handy at a lot of things. My grandfather, Favero, was really handy. Like we talked about, when he died, he had up on where Madeline lives, up in that area, he had 7 foundations poured. He'd built a bunch of houses before, but he had 7 foundations poured and ready to build houses on. He'd gone into the contracting business. So the family has been basically real progressive, and my dad was that way too, and all of them. Tony and Sam, they were all that way. On the Daly side, they were that way, but they had a lot of problems from misfortunes, and like Durward had appendicitis and peritonitis, and Ross worked at the brickyard, and he got emphysema, and that killed him, and that over there, and left his wife with 3 little kids, but as far as temperament, there wasn't a man, I don't think, on my grandfather Dahlia's side that he was scared of or anything. He was tough and rough in one moment, next moment he was gentle as a lamb. He'd do anything for you, but don't get him mad at you. And my grandfather Daly, or my grandfather Favero, he couldn't speak too much English, but he'd get the point over to you in a hurry. He meant business when he told you something. And that's where the family gets those trait of characters from both those old men.
What about your father's hair color? Did he have dark hair, or was it more
His hair was real dark. In fact, he used to wear a mustache that curled up here and was red.
So his mustache was red color.
Yeah, but his hair, he had about 3 hair color changes. It was dark hair. I remember when he had real dark hair and red mustache. Then he went to a pepper and salt. Then he went to a gray. Then he went to the white. But I've had 5 hair color changes. I was born with waxy hair. And then I went to blonde. Then I went to a kind of a dark brown. Then I went to a gray. Then I went to pepper and salt, real gray. Then I went to white. That's where I am now.
I remember a little bit about your father, manner of dress, but I've seen pictures of him when he dressed. He really dressed up.
Well, when they came from Wyoming, when they came into Wyoming, when all the family got there, one of the first things Grandpa Daly or Favero done, he knew J.C. Penney well. My dad knew him well. J.C. Penney come in, so they went to J.C. Penney's, and they'd had a little money then. They'd been working the coal mine. They were pretty well fixed because at that time the coal mines were paying good. But they went there and they bought a brand new suit for all of them. And I got a picture of them with all those dressed up like they got dressed, girls and all. And he went there in J.C. Penney's store, knew him personally, Dad did. And he went there and Grandpa outfitted the whole family in a brand new set of clothes. And they bought all their clothes from Penny's.
Yeah.
And Dad always patronized Penny's before he went any place else.
He dressed pretty good, didn't he? I mean, he had
Oh, yeah. He
coats and scarves and
he was, and that's where the family gets that from.
I got one of his scarves when they was doing the letting out of all of his and grandma's stuff.
I got his cap.
And
I got his clock.
Beautiful scarf.
I got his clock. That clock was my grandfather's. They brought that from Italy. No, I mean they bought it when they came from Italy. They bought it in New York. And it's got New York on it.
Did you ever see your dad get very emotional or emotional?
Oh yeah. He had his he had his tender moments, same as anybody else. But he meant for you to do what you were told, and that's the way it had to be. If you couldn't carry your load, you had to tally up and what he wanted to know why. But he wasn't scared to tackle anything. Dad would tackle most anything. And my Grandpa Daly, he was the same way. Grandpa Favero, boy, whew, he had a temper like lightning, but he was good too. He'd do anything for you. I'll never forget one time, we were just kids and we had some horses there that we used, and we had a brown mare that we'd had her out in the field working all day and brought her in. She was supposed to have a colt, and we'd been plowing, working in the spring there, and we had a big trail there, and Dad says, looks like she's going to have her colt. So they turned her out in the trail, and Jim come over there, and quick as the colt was up and dried off a little bit, Jim crawled through the fence and was going to go over and pet the colt. Well, Grandpa Favero was standing there by the fence, and just Jim got about halfway out to the colt, and the old mare turned around and took after him. He run for the fence, and he wasn't quite going to make it. Grandpa Favero reached over the fence and grabbed him and threw him over the fence just before the horse got him. And boy, he jumped on Jim, and he beat the hell out of him. They told him, warned him not to go in there because the mare was protective of the colt. But that's number one lesson for Jim.
How did your father and your mother handle the passing of Vic and the other boy? Frank.
Frank was number 3 in the family, and we just bought that place over there, and We lived in the old log cabin. It was back over, and there was a big row of trees out in front. And down this side, there was a gate there in the pasture. And I remember Jim was just a little snot, and I was trying to help Mother get the cows in and stuff. And Jim was holding Frank there. And I don't know, it was right in 1918 when the flu was there. And he got the flu, and we lost him. And that hurt pretty bad, but pretty soon here along come Bud and me and Jim there, and they handled it quite well, because they were about the business of having family and raising family, and that took care of their problems. But the one that really upset everybody was Vic, when he got the chicken pox and got a bruise on his leg, and then it turned to infection, and they put it in a cast and turned to gangrene, and went from there to leukemia, and that got him.
How old was he?
6 years old, just ready to start school. He's just older than Ted.
When he died?
Frank was 7 months.
Just a baby then.
We just moved from Roy. We just bought that place and was living there. But I started milking cows when I was 5 years old. I had to milk 3 cows every morning. I'll never forget that place. That was that old house was an old log cabin, and the kitchen was on this side. Over here was the pantry. Over here was the family room. And then there was 2 big bedrooms off on the other side, and there was a porch going out here and a wood platform on it. And every once in a while, and the trap house was way down the way. Well, if you had to go out there at night, you had to be careful and take a light with you, because there used to be a lot of lizards around then. And they got about that long, and you'd walk out there in your bare feet and step on one of them, you'd think the devil had you. Now what?
Okay, this next question is kind of,
Let's do this one and then let's stop, because we've been at it about an
you
hour.
might want to, if you want to pass on this one and go to another one. It says, what special things did you do with your father? Or what was your relationship with him like?
Worked on the farm every day, and worked with Mother. Jim and I, when we were kids, Mother didn't have any help. She had a whole bunch of kids, no girls. So Dad signed me in for 2 weeks to help Mother cook and do all the things. That's where I learned to do a lot of cooking. And I'd take my 2 weeks in, and Jim would help Dad and Bud and Carl tagging along. Carl always tagging along. And anyway, then it'd come my turn to be in 2 weeks. We'd change, and he'd make us do that all summer. And when we used to, after we got a little older, we used to raise a lot of beets. And when we went down the beet field, it'd be about 6 row. Well, if you didn't hoe beets, Dad used to get upset, because we'd go and sit at the end and stay there too long. You want to hoe beets? Yeah. Well, get busy and hoe. So pretty soon we'd sit down again. Hey, come over here. I got a job for you. You stand over here, and he'd get you right out where the sun was hot. And he'd say, take that hoe and you hold it up here. When you get tired of holding that hoe up there, then you go back and hoe beets. You didn't stay there very long. He was glad to go hoe beets. But he had a way of disciplining you, and he didn't have to be rough about it. He just was smooth about it. But as far as working with my dad, he depended on me a lot, left a lot of responsibility on me. And Jim, bless his heart, the mean little bugger, he was always kicking up a fuss and figuring out a way to get out of things. And he's always getting into mischief, Jim was. Never fail. He caused Mother a lot of problems. He was an expert at it, and he still is. And I'll never forget one time years ago when Uncle Carl was still in Wyoming making booze, and then they had some booze, they had some whiskey stills down on this country here, and so they used corn to and there would be this corn mash that we used to get, and Dad would go at night to these places where they had it and haul a big Studebaker wagon load of that corn. And sometimes he'd make couple of trips at night and get that corn. And that's after we built the new house. And then we'd put it in a room in that old log cabin house there because we wasn't used for anything anymore. And so we'd take that corn and feed it to pigs, and we'd feed it to cows. Boy, and make them give milk, and the pigs would grow like crazy. So we used to have to pack a little water to water the pigs at noon, you know. And the pig pen was right close to that old log house. So Jim, the little jackass, went over there and dug a big hole in the middle. And all the water and stuff out of the corn would drain in this hole. He'd go there and dip a bucket of that hot stuff over there and give it to pigs. Well, one day we came out from dinner and we could hear something going, ee, ee. Dad finally figured out it was a pig down in the pig pen. And it has a big white boar, Dad's prized boar pig. And he says, what the hell's the matter with that pig? I don't know. What'd you do, John? Nothing. No, Jim fed him today. I didn't. What'd you do, Jim? Nothing. That poor old pig, he'd sitting on his haunch and he'd go to get up and he'd go, hey! Couldn't make it. Yeah. We thought he was going to die. Finally, Dad got wise. He said, how many buckets did you feed him? Jim says, 2. Them was big buckets. And then hot like that, you know, that old boar just drank that right up. But boy, he got on the biggest drunk I ever seen. He about beat the tar out of Jim for that. He didn't do it the second time. Another thing that happened while we was there, after we built the new barn, we got a horse that was half mule and half horse, half donkey and half horse, and the mule. And that bugger, he was tricky. And he'd dump us off in the cart, and we all kind of things. Dad used to tell Jim, we used to pack the water from the well around to feed the animals. He said to Jim, he said, Jim, you better be careful. You're walking too close to that horse. You're going to get you one of these days. So we was all busy there getting things done, and all of a sudden we heard a racket. Jim a-bawling. He'd walked behind this old mule too close, and that old mule, just as Jim got it past him swinging the buckets, he flipped one of those buckets and kicked it and went right up there and it come right down on top of Jim's head. I can tell you stories like that by the hour that little bugger got into. But he was always into mischief somewhere. So what's next?
Well,
Do you want to go on, or do you want to stop?
well, it's 8:15. We've been about an hour.
Well, that's all right. We can do this some more. You can go into some other things. I can stand here and tell you stories all night long.
Go to 10?
No.
You want to quit, Dad, or you want to go another night, or what would you want to do?
Well, we can do it another night.